Well, in his first term, President Obama had to deal with the ongoing war on terrorism and lift the economy off the canvas. But what lies ahead of him in the second term?
With us to discuss his second term is Sarah James, NBC's Australia correspondent. And in Sydney, we're joined by Bates Gill, the CEO of the US Study Centre at the University of Sydney. Good morning to you both. Sarah James, I'll start with you. And when we were speaking on Wednesday morning, at that stage, it was going to be a very close-run thing, but in the end, it wasn't.
Yeah, in the end, President Obama won by 2,800,000 votes, roughly, and that's pretty convincing, and his win in the Electoral College, of course, was much, much larger than that. So he definitely did everything that he needed to do. I think the Republicans were shocked by the sophistication of the get-out-the-vote effort that the president had in place. So mission one has been accomplished. He won. So sort of the good news is, for President Obama, he won, he's president, and the bad news is, he won, he's president, and he's got a really long to-do list.
Bates Gill in Sydney, there's been lots of talk about reconciliation and everyone's America and we've got to work together towards what's best for America. Is that going to happen now?
It's possible. It's going to be very difficult, obviously, but I think there are some structural factors that are going to help us get a little closer to that kind of outcome. One, of course, is the president himself does not have to seek re-election. It could be he'll be more confident in that way and could step up and deliver a little more leadership than he has apparently been willing to do in the past. And on the other side, the Congress, they do face re-election, and I think Americans are going to be expecting some results that could allow some groundwork for compromise, but it's going to be very, very difficult and very tough choices to be made.
Bates Gill, I just want to take you up there on what you've said about Barack Obama in terms of delivering a little more leadership. How is his leadership lacking in that first term?
Well, you recall that in the first 2 years of his first term, he had a Democratic Congress to work with. And while we did see the landmark legislation go forward of the health care bill, beyond that, it didn't seem as if he himself wished to sort of take a high-profile position and lead a sort of bully pulpit approach to putting forward his agenda. He left a lot to Congress, and by the midterm elections, when he lost the Democrat majority in Congress on the House side, you know, that really led to the deadlock that we saw. So hopefully he'll have a little more confidence and use the White House more effectively to lead towards some useful outcomes.
Sarah James, picking up on Bates Gill's point there about leadership, is an opportunity presents itself now for Barack Obama to do just that, for the US to avoid going over the fiscal cliff, which will happen at the beginning of January if he doesn't negotiate a deal with Congress.
Yeah, you know what, it's both an opportunity and it's an absolute requirement, because we're talking about the Victoria Falls, the Niagara Falls of cliffs here. I mean, this is huge, and they can't afford to go over. Now, this is something he can't do by himself. He's absolutely going to require not only the help of Congress, but this is going to have to be nutted out in Congress. So you're going to see some very tough talking going on. There you're seeing the leader of the Congress of the House of Representatives, Republican John Boehner, and Boehner is the one who's been saying he's made a call to the president, and he said we're going to try and work this out.
Bates Gill, it doesn't sound like you're that impressed with Barack Obama's first term.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I think he accomplished an enormous amount, especially what he was faced with coming into office, the enormous economic and fiscal challenges he had to deal with, and also in the second half of his first term with a do-nothing Congress which was intent on unseating him. So given all of that, it's remarkable that he was able to achieve anything at all. But I think by his nature, President Obama has been reluctant to step forward and use the bully pulpit in a more effective way. That just could be his own personality. It could be the very restraints that he had to face. Now, with this sort of new mandate offered to him, and without having to be concerned about re-election, I think those are the sorts of factors that may well lead us to see a different, a little more forceful and even more effective presidency for him in the second term.
Sarah James, do you have a response to that?
Well, what I was going to say was, I mean, I think what's really crucial here is obviously the fiscal cliff is coming up right away. We're talking January 1 before these automatic spending cuts and tax increases come into play. So that's number one. But look at the other things on the list. There's the economy. We still have an unemployment rate in the United States of 7.9%. That's still a very large number. Then there's the immigration issue. This was one that was very important to many of the voters. There's a huge number, millions of illegal immigrants to the United States, and many of them want a path toward being recognized and legal and becoming citizens. What happens with that? Then there's what happens in the Mideast, obviously an incredibly important situation. So there is such a long list of important issues that need to be resolved, and then Asia as well.
Bates Gill, I wanted to pick up on a point that Sarah James just made just then, and that's about immigration, because the Republicans now are doing a lot of soul-searching, looking at themselves after this loss, and they're quite divided as to whether to move closer to the middle or further to the right. Which direction do you see Republicans needing to head in to be relevant in 4 years' time?
Well, as Sarah was saying, I think immigration is going to be a critical issue going forward. This is an area where there may well be some room for compromise between the two sides, not least because of the growing voice which especially Latino Americans will have going forward as part of the electorate, and a voice which the Republicans have not been too successful in tapping. So it could be that on that issue we'll see some compromise, a sort of path to citizenship being brought forward. And that's going to be important for the Republicans because this is a growing demographic segment of the electorate that they just haven't had much success with.
Bates Gill, we heard Sarah James refer earlier to this fiscal cliff as the Niagara Falls. She's obviously got serious concerns about just how dramatic that could be. We had another guest this morning saying it won't be the end of the world if that happens. What's your view on that?
Well, recall that last year we went through a similar sort of crisis mode with the parties pointing guns at one another figuratively and threatening to go over a similar kind of fiscal cliff. They found a compromise. They found a way around it. The president, you might recall, in his last debate said that this was not going to happen. I think the political folks in Washington understand that this is something that a compromise will be reached of one kind or another, and I think we can avoid this. It's just going to be a lot of wrangling and a lot of rhetoric and a lot of toing and froing beforehand. But I'm confident that the two sides will find a way to avoid the so-called fiscal cliff and still move forward into 2013.
Well, and I'm agreeing with what you're saying. I also think that the Republicans are very chastened at the moment. Imagine if you spent $6 billion, $6 billion with a B, and you got pretty much what you started with. And that's what's happened to the Republicans. And so there's some real soul-searching, I think, going on in the Republican Party about what they do. And I think they're aware that the American public expects both. They expect both the House of Representatives and the Senate and the president to do what they were elected to do, to figure this out and to stop fighting.
The fact that Representative Boehner, the head of the House of Representatives on the Republican side, was hinting that revenue can be generated, revenues can be found, is a big compromise from what we heard last year. So I think already the two sides are finding ways to move together.
Yeah, it's like we've got to the stage where enough's enough.
Bates Gill, I just wanted to ask you one question about China. You're an East Asia expert. The China Congress is taking place at the moment, and we know about the Americans' pivot to Asia. How wary are the Chinese of that, and how wary are the Americans of the Chinese?
Well, that's a big question. I think generally speaking, the relationship has really had a lot of difficulties in recent past year or two. Both sides looking at the other much more warily, I would say. And as the Chinese are going through a very important transition process, that too, I think, constrains the ability of any new leader to try and reach out and establish a sort of new, more trustful relationship with any of its major partners, not least the United States. So I think we're going into a continued period of strategic mistrust between the United States and China, and we'll just have to wait and see how the new leaders come into office and gain their own confidence to see how they might reestablish a better relationship. I'm not predicting any serious problems between the United States and China, but it's going to be a continued wary relationship between the two for some time.
Were you surprised at the negativity of the comments and how intensive they were in relation to China in those debates?
Not particularly. I guess I was most surprised how little China really played, particularly, for example, in the foreign policy debate itself. It's clearly the center of gravity is moving to this part of the world, to the Asia-Pacific. That's a given, and it's only going to become more so in the future. It strikes me that perhaps Americans and even American leaders are not yet feeling entirely comfortable to really engage this region in a way that they have to. President Obama, among recent presidents, has probably done the most in that way, and we can probably expect his second administration to further deepen the engagement here. But as an issue for Americans, for the American public, it's still, I think, down the list, the Asia-Pacific as one for them to be concerned about, and so that gets reflected in the politicians' public statements.
Bates Gill in Sydney, thank you very much. Sarah James with us here in the studio. Thank you.